In this episode, we talk about the ongoing Iran-Israel conflict and the growing fears of a possible nuclear disaster. We also take a look at India's nuclear capabilities and how a new report places it ahead of Pakistan. But we begin by talking about the Indian economy and a revised way to measure it. Hi, I am Niharika Nanda, and you are listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Earlier this month, in an interview to the Indian Express, Saurabh Garg, Secretary to Government of India in the Ministry of Statistics and Programme Implementation, said that the ministry is in the process of revising the base year for the calculation of GDP. GDP, or the Gross Domestic Product, as many of you would know, is the total market value of all goods and services produced within a country over a specific period. And revising the base year enables the government to get a much better understanding of the metric and the Indian economy. Now to discuss exactly how it does that, my colleague Shashank Bhargav speaks to the Indian Express's Udit Mishra, who writes on the economy for the paper.
Udit, for a lot of people, this might sound a bit technical. So could you start off by telling us what exactly do they mean when they say that they will be revising the base year for calculating the GDP?
Yes, so the simple understanding of a base year is that it's the starting point for GDP calculations. When I say GDP calculations, we are talking about GDP growth rates. So when you say that India grew by 6.5, you typically say that 6.5 over the last year. And every series of GDP data, we'll talk about the series in a bit, but every series takes a fresh guard every 5 years, 10 years. And that particular fresh guard, that means that particular year where we say, okay, we'll restart our GDP calculations, take a fresh look, becomes the base year, right? That is the starting point for calculations yet again. It is not completely disconnected with the previous series. There are obviously some linkages, but every 5 years, 10 years, India takes a fresh guard on the GDP calculation, how it calculates. And that particular year has to be typically a normal year. It should be a normal year. It should not have some angularity, like a COVID pandemic year cannot be a base year. So you take a normal year and you say, okay, what is the GDP in this year? And let's calculate the GDP growth in future years relative to this base year.
And what is the benefit of revising it? How do we get a better understanding of our GDP by revising the base year?
So there are two broad ideas behind this. One is that the Indian economy changes quite substantially every 5 years, or at the very least every 10 years. The migration patterns change, the people's work patterns change. So the economic output, when we talk about GDP, it's the economic output of the country. That economic output comes from very different sources, or at least comes from slightly different sources every 5 years, 10 years. Now, if you were the statistician in the government trying to calculate what is India's GDP, you would have to look every 5 years for new sources of data, because the economic output would be happening from new sources. For example, up till a particular year, just for argument's sake, there were no IT services in India, right, contributing to India's GDP. And then over the next 5, 10, 15 years, IT services and technology services really, grew fast and contributed immensely in India's GDP. Now, if you were not taking a fresh guard every 5 years, 10 years, and looking for new sources of data, then you may be, not understanding or not stating India's GDP correctly, because you would not be looking at the right things. So that is why you take every 5 years, you sort of create a new base year, look for new sets of data, and that captures the actual state, accurate state of the economy. The other bit is also to understand that what is the real economic growth? When we talk about 5% or 6% growth that we experience, it's the real economic growth. But how do we calculate that real economic growth? We have to take away the effect of prices.
Right, we're basically taking out inflation.
Yeah, the effect of inflation out of the nominal data that we observe. So it's much easier to do that, and more accurate picture comes through if we take 5-year breaks or 10-year breaks, because prices do go up. So if you want to understand really what is happening in the economy, you have to take those breaks. Also the fact, again, in that also, the real economy also, you may not be producing as many tractors or harmoniums, right? But you may be producing, say, keyboards. So if you do not take a break and reassess and rejig what variables you put in the GDP calculation, if you're only suppose counting the number of harmoniums sold and not looking at the number of keyboards sold, then you may be underestimating, because maybe people playing harmonium is less and people playing keyboards is more, and you've not tweaked that. So the idea is to understand what is the real impact on the economy also.
Okay, so to understand this better, let's take an analogy, where we are measuring the output of a worker. We want to find out what all that worker is doing and how efficiently they're doing it. So let's say Udit, for example, he's writing daily pieces for the Indian Express. He has his column, Explained Speaking. He's doing videos. So we calculate all that and maybe also find out how many people are engaging with these things in a year. And that becomes our base year. But 5 years later, turns out Udit is also doing podcasts. But we are not measuring that right now. And maybe 5 years later, he has stopped his column. So we don't need to count that. So I guess to understand how efficiently Udit is working, we need to revise that base year.
Yes, exactly. You've actually got a better example here that, people's reading habits change. They maybe read less of me and listen to me more on the audio or watch me more on video. And by just looking at how many people are reading me, somebody might be underestimating or not at least accurately understanding who reads me and to whom do I reach? What is my reach essentially? So it is a matter of knowing accurately or as accurately as possible what is the current state of the economy. And it's very important to understand that GDP is not easy to calculate. It's a very complicated calculation, or more appropriately said, to be an estimation, because it's not possible for anybody to calculate exactly what India's GDP or the GDP of any country is. There will be certain gaps. The idea is to reduce those gaps and get as accurate a picture as possible.
And you mentioned that the base year is revised every 5 years, right? But that actually did not happen the last time in 2017. Could you talk about what was the reason for that?
Yes, so the revision is happening this time over the base year of 2011-2012. So that's more than a decade. And ideally, we should have had a revision in 2017-18. That year was actually supposed to be the new base year. And this government had announced in June 2017 that 2017-18 would be the base year. But, typically the idea behind making something a base year is also that certain new data series is available, surveys are available. So that year we had two crucial surveys that were getting available. One was the Periodic Labor Force Survey, which talks about unemployment and employment situation in India. And there was also the Consumption Expenditure Survey, which talks about how much are Indians spending. And both these surveys actually got into a lot of controversy when the government itself said that it was not happy with the data quality. And it so happened that this was just before the Lok Sabha election in 2019, when the survey results were about to come. And then there was a lot of controversy around it. And then after the Lok Sabha election results, the government accepted one of them, which was PLFS, but did not accept the other, which was a Consumption Expenditure Survey. So the use of 2017-18 as a base year, as a new base year for us, became difficult because the government itself was not happy with the surveys that came out. And also remember that to some extent 2017-18 was a year which had the introduction of GST, the goods and services tax, which fundamentally changed the way India had indirect taxes. So we had a multiple set of indirect taxes where they were all subsumed into GST. And also the fact that 2017-18 still had the effect of the economic repercussions of the demonetization decision, where 86% of India's money supply was sucked out overnight. So the impact of those things also didn't really make 2017-18 to be the ideal, the normal year that we hope to use as a base year. So it was a combination of factors. And by the time the new government took charge in 2019, very soon we had the COVID pandemic, and then the COVID pandemic wasn't a normal year. The year after it still had the second COVID wave and wasn't a normal year. And that's how we find ourselves now with 2022-23 as the new base year.
And this revision is coming at a time when India is slated to become the fourth largest economy and eventually the third largest economy. So talk a bit about why the timing of this revision might be crucial.
Yes, so I think this is a very crucial revision for a variety of reasons. For one, as you just noted, that we have missed one cycle. Typically, every 5 years, we should rebase the GDP. We should get a new year as a base year. And we've missed that cycle. So whatever benefits that were to accrue to us from a new base year in 2017-18 or anywhere around that, in terms of accuracy of GDP data, have been lost. Add to that the fact that we actually have had a period when we've not had census since 2011. We've not had data on poverty, inequality, the way we used to have. There are other data available on poverty, but those are not comparable with the way it was happening till 2011-12. So there has been a significant gap in our understanding of the economy because the data has just not been there. The data that has come out has not been to the government's liking, and it has sort of put it behind and sort of raised question marks on it. That itself raises credibility issues on India's data. And the last bit is that while all these data gaps are there, in 2015, when we had the last revision of the base year, ideally, it should have led to people trusting India's GDP more. But actually, for the first time, we found that even people who worked in the government, crucial entities like the chief economic advisor and some of the best minds tracking India's economy, all of them said that the new GDP series was overstating India's GDP. And this is a controversy that has been happening since 2015, ever since this data came out, and it hasn't died down. There are detractors who think that India has been overstating India's GDP.
And Udit, what does that do to a country's reputation? How does a country get affected when people, especially those outside the country, don't trust its data?
Yes, so this is very crucial. See, if we were a laggard in the world economy, and we are a laggard in terms of per capita incomes, but in overall size of the economy, we are very close to becoming the third largest economy in a matter of a year or two. Now, for that scale of economy, you attract a lot of global attention. You use that economy. We often say we are the third largest or fourth largest economy or fifth largest, whichever the number is appropriate at any point, to argue that we should get a greater say in global affairs. But if your data is not respected or the data is not credible, then the whole argument falters. Also, the fact that if India has to grow from here, we are talking about another 20 years trying to become a developed country by 2047, it requires the world to come and, invest in India, right? Global investors have to trust us. Also, the fact that while this investment is going to happen, we know that our domestic policies have to be appropriate. How do you know whether a sector is doing well? How do you know which person requires what kind of policy, which sectoral reform is required? All of that comes through from GDP data. So at a time when we are becoming the third largest economy in the world, there is a massive data gap, and there's also been a considerable credibility gap. And you do not want to become like China, which, while it is growing, there is almost a genuine disregard for China's data. Nobody really knows what China's GDP or growth rate is. And it has implications for India's stature. A lot of Indians want India to become a superpower. They want India's currency to be the global currency. But none of that will happen, as it's not happening for China, until unless we are an economy where data credibility is there, where people believe what they see. So it's very central to India really achieving its potential to have very good quality data. So not having census, not having surveys which are even respected within the government, that puts a big question mark and really undermines India's economic potential.
And now, moving away from the Indian economy, we turn to the escalating conflict between Iran and Israel. Yesterday, US President Donald Trump urged all Iranians to immediately evacuate Tehran as airstrikes and missile attacks between Israel and Iran continue to intensify for the fifth straight day. The conflict began after Israel launched a series of strikes on Iran, targeting nuclear sites, missile facilities, and other military infrastructure after it found out that Iran was conducting secret nuclear activities. So far, 22 people have been reported dead in Israel, while Iran's health ministry says that at least 224 people have died in Israeli strikes. Now, during this time, Israel had hit major nuclear sites in Iran, including the Natanz enrichment complex, raising fears of a nuclear disaster or a major radioactive leak. But turns out the chances of that are relatively low. To understand why that is the case, we are joined by the Indian Express's Amitabh Sinha. Amitabh, what has been the immediate trigger for this conflict? What made Israel strike Iran last week?
Right. So, without going into the entire history of this conflict, this is at the core of, the Middle Eastern conflict with a very, very long history. But the current conflict that is going on between Israel and Iran, the immediate trigger, as Israel claims, is to decapitate Iran's capability to produce a nuclear weapon. Now, Iran has a nuclear program, and that's been going on for a very long time. Iran says it's entirely peaceful in nature, meaning that it will be used only for producing electricity, nuclear power, and that is what its nuclear program is meant for. Whereas it is fairly well known that Iran has been in the process of enriching nuclear fuel, and enrichment is a process through which you get into a position to make nuclear weapons. So the fact that Iran has an enrichment facility and that it has been enriching uranium to make it fit for a nuclear weapon, that has been going on, and that is fairly well known. But Iran maintains that its nuclear program is entirely peaceful. Israel, on the other hand, as I said, wants to ensure that Iran is not in a position to build a nuclear weapon, which Israel says is an existential threat to itself. So the current trigger, as we said, is, according to Israel, an effort to take down Iran's attempts to get a nuclear weapon for itself.
And we understand that Israel attacked the Natanz nuclear facility in Iran's Isfahan province. But why did Israel go particularly for this facility? And do we know anything about the damage caused?
So now Natanz is one of their key nuclear facilities in Iran, and that both sides have acknowledged that has been attacked. We have heard lots of reports about nuclear facilities across Iran being targeted, but only Natanz has been named till now. We do not know what other nuclear facilities have been struck by Israel. Neither side has actually come out with the specifics. Only Natanz has been named till now. Now, the extent of damage, we do not know, but it's confirmed that that place has been hit by multiple strikes. But we do not know what exactly has been damaged till now.
And Amitabh, can you tell us a little bit about the Natanz facility and what exactly is stored there?
So Natanz is Iran's the main enrichment facility, and enrichment we discussed earlier as well. Enrichment is the process by which you increase the concentration of uranium-235 in natural uranium. So uranium is a nuclear fuel. The natural uranium that we get, that is not a fissile material, meaning its nuclear doesn't break. Natural uranium is mainly an isotope of uranium which is called U-238, uranium-238. What is relevant for nuclear fission reaction is uranium-235, right? A slightly lighter isotope of uranium, because uranium-235 is an unstable isotope and its nucleus breaks into two, And in the process of breaking up, it releases a lot of energy. And this energy is what gets utilized either for producing electricity or in a nuclear weapon as well. So this particular facility, Natanz, that we were talking about, this is the place where uranium is enriched. The concentration of uranium-235, that is increased through this enrichment process, and that is what can potentially be used to build a nuclear weapon. So that's why this facility is very, very crucial.
Right. And at this point, what a lot of people are wondering is, could there be a leak or even a nuclear explosion if the weapons hit the facility directly?
Okay, so for that, we need to understand the fact that nuclear weapons are very, very different from conventional bombs or chemicals that we naturally think of. Right? Nuclear weapons don't work the way a conventional bomb, for example, work. So we do call it a nuclear bomb, but it is very different from a normal bomb, an explosive that is used. So we usually think that if there is some explosive stored at some place, if that is hit by some missile, or if it is damaged or some pressure is put on that explosive will explode, or that chemical will explode, that bomb will go off. And that is what has happened. Supposing you have a warehouse full of explosives or bombs and you attack it with a missile, the natural reaction, of course, would be that the entire thing would just explode, causing a lot of damage. The same thing doesn't happen with a nuclear weapon or a nuclear warhead, right? If a nuclear weapon is stored at some place and you have lots of them stored in a warehouse, for example, and if it is attacked by a conventional weapon, say an incoming missile, or if a bomb is dropped on that facility, the nuclear weapons, all of them don't explode. That's not how a nuclear weapon works. The nuclear weapon actually is set off by an uncontrolled nuclear chain reaction, and in which process a huge amount of energy is released. Right? In a very short time, in a very small space, a huge amount of energy is released, and that energy is what causes a huge amount of damage. But if those things are hit by a missile, for example, it won't cause a nuclear explosion. It won't cause a nuclear bomb going off. It would not even cause a major radiation leak. What it might cause is that, the warheads or the nuclear material, it might just spread into the environment locally, and it might lead to local contamination of radiation, mostly confined to the facility or to the neighboring areas. Not too much of a concern. It's not a widespread nuclear radiation leak. So the dangers or the risk of a nuclear explosion or a nuclear bomb going off because Natanz or other nuclear facilities were attacked by conventional weapons, those fears are unfounded.
And Amitabh, have there been similar situations in the past that raised these kinds of fears?
So during the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, for example, so there is one of the largest nuclear power reactors which is operational in Ukraine in a place called Zaporizhzhia. So Zaporizhzhia is supposed to be one of the largest nuclear power plants in Europe. And there was a lot of infighting happening around that nuclear power plant. In fact, the Russians actually overpowered Ukrainian personnel and they got hold of the nuclear power plant, the entire facility. This facility is very different from Natanz or any other Iranian facility we are talking about. This is a civilian electricity production center, right? It's a nuclear power plant. But still, you have similar kind of stuff that is stored here. Not similar, but at least you have fissile material which is stored. That's the fuel that is being used. Not a highly enriched version, but the 3 to 5% kind of nuclear fuel that we talked about. And you have the potential of similar kind of things, of similar kind of risks of radiation happening. So we have been in this position earlier, but so far the Zaporizhzhia power plant has been relatively okay. There has been no incident of any nuclear leak from there, and certainly no risks of a nuclear explosion happening from that.
And finally, we talk about India's own nuclear capabilities. According to the latest yearbook released by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute on Monday, India has more nuclear warheads than Pakistan. As of January 2025, India is estimated to have 180 stored nuclear warheads, while Pakistan has around 170. Though China, on the other hand, has about 600, nearly 3 times as many as India. The yearbook says India slightly expanded its arsenal in 2024 and continued developing new types of nuclear delivery systems. One key focus is on what's known as canisterized missiles. These can be moved around with warheads already attached and once fully operational may even be able to carry multiple warheads on a single missile. According to a report by the Indian Express's Amrita Nayak Datta, Pakistan has also been working on new delivery systems and stockpiling more fissile material, which means its arsenal could grow in the years ahead. The yearbook also highlights that Russia and the US still have the largest nuclear stockpiles, over 5,000 warheads each, including retired ones. And it notes that countries like Russia, China, India, Pakistan and North Korea are all developing what are called dual-capable missiles, systems that can carry either conventional or nuclear warheads. While Pakistan remains the main focus of India's nuclear strategy, the yearbook says India is now also putting more emphasis on longer-range weapons that can reach targets across China. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Shashank Bhargav and me, Niharika Nanda. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.